So I had kind of a puzzling conversation today that I'm still trying to kind of get my head wrapped around of the dynamics and what was at play there. So I figured I'd talk through it a little bit. I was in a conversation with a few other people about Plato and philosophy, specifically his book, The Republic. And for those not familiar or maybe haven't read it in a while, it's I'm not going to do it fully justice, but it's about talking about what would be the ideal city or the ideal state. Like, how would you, if you designed it, what would it look like? How would you set it up? And it's a conversation about, the different considerations. And he talks about, the importance of, virtue and justice and temperance and all different things. But what was interesting was, as we were going through the conversation and kind of talking about the book, it's somewhat obvious to make note that there's things discussed about what would make for a good city that today seem insane, right? Slavery being an obvious one, right? There's talk of slavery and how you would treat women and children and censorship and different things. And I've had a few of these conversations where inevitably it starts to kind of hone in on that. And there's this view of, on the one side, there's people that are like, it's shocking and it makes me laugh, or, I can't even believe it, whichever direction they go, that somebody could think those things, right? And then pretty inevitably, there's people on the other side who kind of come to the point of, well, yeah, like obviously those aren't good things, but it was a function of the time, and we're not trying to say that he got everything right, and it's more of a a place to start, etc. And there's this people trying to kind of wrap their arms around, what do I make of some of these thoughts, and what's the value in it, right? What do I take away from this? What should I take away from this, etc. And it seems like that dichotomy kind of exists, where either you're dismissive of it because you can't even believe how crazy it is, or not that you necessarily defend it, but you're also dismissive of it, but in a different way of like, well, you shouldn't worry too much about that. Like, that part was wrong. So don't let that detract from the other pieces, right? Focus on the pieces that he quote unquote got right. And pretty on script for me, I can't help but thinking like, I don't know if we're doing ourselves a disservice thinking about it that way, right? If you've ever watched my videos, or I'll say it now, like, to me, getting shit wrong is one of the most, useful, productive, valuable things you can have, right? And you take something, and that sounds cliche, right? Like, oh, mistakes are a great opportunity to learn. Sure, right? It's in line with that, but let's be more nuanced. Let's be more complex. Let's take this example of Plato and the Republic. You have this amazing opportunity where you take this, seemingly genius, right? At least a really thoughtful, wise person who showed his work in an unbelievably extensive way of like, hey, here's how, and doing it in the way of a conversation is like, here's how I think about the perfect city, right? If you pair that with the idea that, like, what is truth? Like, what is objective truth? Is it more of an ideal or an aspiration? Is it real? Who knows? But right, it would seem to indicate that, like, quote unquote, the right way to do something, or the truth is super hard to find. And I think Plato would likely agree with that. So you have this person kind of putting out their views on what they think is quote unquote right and showing their work through it. If your view of that is just to look at the output and say, well, what did he get right? What did he get wrong? Let's just focus on that and learn from it. You're missing so much. Dig into that fucking work. Get into all of that and understand why. Why did he get it wrong? Not because you're angry. I mean, fair, if you want to be angry, right? Slavery is a despicable thing. You could be angry about that. But the more valuable thing, or at least a valuable thing, that I think gets dismissed is digging into that. Like, hey, Plato was super smart. I get it. It was a function of the time. Slavery was there. But why was he so certain about this thing, right? Why, how did he get this wrong? He showed me his work. Let me try and dig into that and understand, because that's the value to be had, right? To dismiss it as either, offensive and you're angry about it, or, almost embarrassed by it, like, just don't worry about it, let's focus on the good, again, is such a disservice. That's the valuable part. That's the super valuable part that you can really learn from, to see somebody's mind in action and where maybe the math went wrong, and to try and understand and improve upon that. It's such a useful real life, or in this case theoretical, but example to dissect and pull apart and take value from. And I just think that's such an important piece of whatever conversation, whatever book, podcast, whatever it is, when something's wrong, when something's off, perhaps even offensive or just doesn't seem right, don't dismiss it. Understand why, dissect it, get underneath it, right? Not so that you could diminish it more or be more angry about it or whatever it might be. That might be an outcome. But first, Feynman that thing, right? Richard Feynman that thing. Be curious. How did he get this wrong? What exactly was his thinking? What led him to believe this? What led him to be so sure that he was right about this when now we look at it and it's wrong? And then take it a step further and say, hey, where are we doing that today? Where are we just assuming like, well, yeah, obviously this is right or that's right, but we're maybe doing it, right? The lesson of that, the ability to take that parallel can be so unbelievably powerful, and I just don't think we should gloss over it that easily.